Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics Duo here. Today we have a 2011 Hyundai Genesis with a 3.8 liter. The customer complaint on this car is that the car cranks but it doesn't start, okay? The engine only cranks over but it does not run. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about this vehicle. The customer stated that everything was fine about a couple hours ago. He was driving on the highway and then all of a sudden the vehicle shut off. And when the vehicle shut off, all the lights on the dash came on. So he pulled off to the side, turned the key off, tried to start it again. It wouldn't start back up. So from that point on, it became a crank, no start condition. So he put it on the tow truck, towed it to our shop. Now here we are. So we have to diagnose this vehicle, find out what went wrong, and then fix it. So before we do that, we're going to confirm the customer's complaint first. So I'm going to step on the brake pedal and then push this push start button here so we can try to start it. I already did this off camera. It's not starting, it's just cranking. So let's see. So the battery is a little bit weak. I'm going to put a battery charger on the battery and then we're going to try this one more time. I did put a battery charger on the battery, so now let's try it again. As you guys can hear, the engine cranks over, but it doesn't start. So right there. Alright, so we have confirmed the customer's complaint. So now the next step is going to be connecting a scan tool to the car so we can see if we have any trouble codes in memory. So I will connect the scan tool to the car and bring you guys back up. Alright, so I got the scan tool connected. So now let's scan this vehicle for some trouble codes. Right there, 2011 Hyundai Genesis with a 3.8 liter. So let's go to engine, codes, pending codes. So there are no codes present. History codes. So there are no history codes. Well, I'm not surprised because the battery died. They tried cranking it for so long it drained the battery, okay? And this vehicle sat here for a day or two, so the battery was completely dead. So we don't have any trouble codes, so we don't have any directions, right? So what do you do when you don't have trouble codes in memory? Which route do you take? Well, like any other car, you need three main things for an engine to run, okay? You need compression, you need spark, and you need fuel in a cylinder for an engine to run. This is a gas engine. Knowing the way it cranks, I don't think we have a compression issue. Just listen to it. So there is no inconsistency in the way it cranks. It cranks very well. I don't think we have a mechanical issue. Again, I could be wrong, but I'm not gonna check compression right now because that's not the route I'm gonna go based on how well the engine sounds. So the next thing we're gonna do is we can check spark and make sure we have spark or fuel. So let's go under the hood and see what's gonna be the easiest thing we can check first. So let's go under the hood and let's rule out mechanical issues first because it sounds well. Let's go under the hood and see if we can either check spark or fuel, whichever one that is easy to check first. And there isn't any specific way of doing this. You can check spark first or you can check fuel first. Whatever, it's just a matter of preference. So let's go under the hood and see what we can check first. All right, let's see what we got. Let's remove this engine cover. All right, so the engine cover is out of the way. The first thing I'm looking at is this coils. So the coils on the driver's side are pretty easy to access. So we can do spark first, we can check spark first, or we can do fuel pressure. I'm also looking around the fuel rail here to see if there's a service port on the fuel rail, but it looks like these fuel rails do not have a service port. Actually, I'm gonna bring you guys here so you can see what I'm looking at. All right, here's the engine. We're gonna stay low tech first. Let's check the easy stuff first before we get too sophisticated. All right, so here are the ignition coils on the driver's side bank, and these are pretty easy to access. We can pop one of these coils out and then check for spark. Okay, and then the other thing we can also check is fuel pressure. When I'm looking at this fuel rail here, unfortunately we do not have a service port. This engineer wasn't kind enough to make a fuel port here that we can tap into with the pressure gauge to see if we're getting any fuel pressure here. So there's one fuel rails, one on the driver's side bank, and then there's another one down here. It's under the intake. I don't know if you guys can see it, for the passenger side bank. All right, so I want to start by checking fuel pressure first because of the mileage on the dash. This is a high mileage vehicle. I think it has over 200,000 miles. And based on the symptom that the customer explained, he said he was driving and then all of a sudden it shut off. The lights on the dash came on. So I could be wrong, but I doubt we have a spark issue. I think we have a fuel pressure issue. But again, I could be wrong. Let's check fuel pressure first. If we have fuel pressure, then we will move on to the next thing. All right. So since we don't have a service port here on this fuel rail, we're gonna find a way to tap into the feed line, fuel line somewhere here. Okay. So this is the main line that supplies fuel to the fuel rails, this one and this one over here. And if we follow it under this harness, it comes up to this point. Okay, so this is our main fuel line. This is the feed line right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo these two nuts. Let's remove these two nuts and pop this fuel line out. And then we're going to crank the vehicle. While I'm cranking it, fuel should come out of here. So I'm going to get a wrench and remove these two nuts. Again, we're checking fuel pressure first. You don't have to start by checking fuel pressure if you have a crank and no start condition, because you could have ignition coils that are not firing. Okay, so this is just a matter of preference. You know, I just preferred to check fuel pressure first, but you could check spark first, you could check compression. I ruled out compression because of how well this engine sounds. I see a little bit of fuel there, so I'm gonna find something that I'm gonna put this line into, and then I'm gonna go inside the car and crank it. While I crank it, fuel should come out of this line. So I'll find something to put here, and then I will leave you guys here under the hood so you can watch this line while I'm cranking it. Alright guys, I'm gonna use this water bottle to catch any fuel that's gonna flow out of this fuel line. So I'm gonna put it right here. The line is gonna go inside the bottle because we don't want fuel to be sprayed all over the engine. Once I turn the key on, fuel should come out of this line. And while I crank it, more fuel should even flow out of that line. So I'm gonna leave you guys focused here on this line and this water bottle, and I'll go inside the car and crank it. So as I crank it, fuel should come out of there. Alright guys, you heard the engine crank. What do you guys think? The engine sounds good. It sounds really even. There's no inconsistency by the way it sounds. So I don't think we have a mechanical problem with this engine. And as you can see, our water bottle is still empty. When you first turn the key on, the fuel pump primes the system. So with just the key on, we should see fuel inside this water bottle. And while you crank it, the fuel pump stays on to supply fuel to the injectors to keep the engine running. And again, our water bottle is empty. So this fuel line is not supplying fuel to the engine. So that's why this engine is not running. So what do you guys think the issue is? Well, it could be a couple of things. It could be the pump itself. or it could be the fuel pump relay or the fuel pump fuse. Well, based on the mileage, as I went back inside the car to crank it, I realized that the car has 301,000 miles. So I believe the fuel pump went bad. But we're just not gonna condemn the fuel pump and get the fuel pump and replace it, because before we replace the fuel pump, we have to do some testing first. So you could start by checking the fuel pump fuse, or you can check the fuel pump relay. I'm not going to check that. I'm going to go straight to the fuel pump and check it, and if it checks out okay, and then work my way back to the relay and the fuse. So the fuel pump has to have ground and power for it to run. So it receives a constant ground and then a power once you turn the key on or while you're cranking the engine. And the fuel pump on this vehicle is located under the back seat. So let's go inside the car, disconnect the fuel pump electrical connector, and do some checks. Guys, I'm gonna show you the reason why I started by checking fuel pressure. I'm gonna show you the mileage on this car. So 301,000 miles. So it has a lot of miles. So let's locate this fuel pump and do some tests at the connector and see what we're gonna find out. The fuel pump lives here under the back seat. So we're gonna pop the back seat out. So it just pops up, and then it has one bolt down here that holds the back of it. It's a 12mm bolt. There's one on this side and another one on the other side. So I will remove the one on the other side next. Alright, so I removed the other bolt, so now we can lift the back seat. Alright, so here's the back seat. I'm just gonna take it out. Alright, so the back seat is removed, and here is the cover for the fuel pump. So I'm going to remove these little phillips screws to get access to the fuel pump. And the fuel pump has got two wires. There is a black wire and a white wire. So the black wire is a constant ground, is the ground supply to the pump, and then the white wire is the power supply. So I'm going to use some long jumper cables to get power and ground from under the hood to test these wires. Alright, so here's the connector for the fuel pump. We're gonna disconnect it, and there it is. So on this connector, I don't know if you guys can see, I'll bring you guys down here so you can have a closer look of what I'm about to do. I'll go grab a razor blade and do some tests. I'm gonna have to open up this wire loom, and then we'll get some piercing probes to do some tests here. So I'll go grab the tool and I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm gonna open up this wire loom. So we got 4 wires. The green and blue wires are the wires for the fuel level sensor. And then the black wire is a constant ground for the fuel pump. And then the white wire is the power supply wire for the fuel pump. So I'm gonna use these piercing tools to pierce this wire. I mean, I could back probe these wires, but I think I'm gonna have to open this connector. I guess I can just open this instead of back probing. So I can just pop this off. I know some of you guys do not like piercing wires, so right here. So we're gonna do it this way, so we can just back probe these 2 wires instead of using this piercing tool. So I'll go get 2 back probe tool and then we'll back probe these two wires. Alright, so I'm gonna back probe the black wire, which is the ground supply wire for the pump, right there. And I'm gonna back probe the white wire, the power supply. Alright guys, so I back probed these two wires, the main ground wire and the power feed for the fuel pump. So now I'm going to use a test light. So this test light is going to bypass the pump, okay? I'm gonna put this test light in series with these two wires. And once I turn the key on with this test light connected to one end of the test light is gonna be connected to ground, and then the other side of the test light is gonna be connected to power. If the test light lights, that will tell me that the fuel pump is receiving power and ground. And since it's not running, the issue is the pump itself, okay? So I'm bypassing the fuel pump with the test light to check for power and ground to the fuel pump. So I'm going to use these jumper wires here. And you have to be careful doing this because you don't want to send straight ground to this control wire. This wire is coming from the computer, okay? There is a transistor inside the computer that sends power to this wire. If you ground it, if you send full ground to this, you can hurt the computer. So you have to be careful doing this. I mean, you don't want that to touch ground while the driver is on in the computer, okay? So one side of my jumper wires will go to one side of the test light, okay? So my ground is gonna go right here on this side. I don't know if you guys can see, but I hope you guys can see what I'm doing. And then this side is gonna go to the other side of the test light, okay? So here's my test light. So basically one side is, so the ground is on this side of the test light, and then power, this yellow jumper wire, is on this side of the test light. So now when I go on the driver's seat and turn the key on, the test light should light. If the test light lights, that would tell me that we have power and ground making it to the fuel pump. If the test light doesn't light, we have to check these wires individually. We have to make sure we have ground and power on the other wire, okay? So now I'm gonna go on the driver's seat and turn the key on. Alright guys, so we are bypassing the fuel pump using a test light. So now I'm gonna crank the engine. If the pump is receiving power and ground, the test light should light while the engine is cranking. So let's do it. I hope you guys heard the engine cranking. The engine is cranking, the test light lights. Let's do that one more time. The test light lights. Alright guys, so we are done. Well, the issue is at this point there is no more testing we have to do. The issue is the fuel pump itself, okay? So we have confirmed with the test light that we have power and ground at the fuel pump connector. The fuel pump is receiving power and ground. The fuel pump is an electric motor. If it's receiving power and ground, it should run, right? So since it's not running, we know that the pump itself is defective. So at this point, we're gonna remove the pump and replace it. And then after I get the pump replaced, I will bring you guys back up so I can give you guys the after shots of the engine running. I'm sure once I get the pump replaced, this engine will run again. So, defective fuel pump. And guys, this is how you test a fuel pump. Make sure you check your power and ground first before you replace a component. Pretty much any component. This goes across the board. Whether it's an electric motor, whether it's a sensor, you have to make sure you check your powers and grounds first. Whether it's a computer, This goes across the board. Make sure you're getting good power, good ground. If the component still doesn't work, then the issue is the component itself. Okay, so I will remove this pump. Alright guys, so we confirmed that the fuel pump is receiving power and ground and is still not running. So the fuel pump is defective. If the pump is receiving power and ground, it's an electric motor, it should run. Since it's not running, it's dead. And that's why the engine is not starting. So I'm gonna have to use some electrical tape to fix this wire loom here. We're gonna tape this up. But again, we confirmed that the pump is getting power and ground since it's not running, so it's bad. You might wonder why I went this route, because I went this route because of what the customer said and also because of the mileage. I don't know if I'm being repetitive, but sometimes you just have to look at some clues on a car so you can determine your direction, especially since we didn't have any trouble codes. So we made the right call, we followed the right path. This is where the issue is. So now we're gonna disconnect these lines so we can remove the fuel pump. So I'm gonna have to pull this plastic cover out. So we have some residual pressure bleeding off the line there, so that's fuel. So basically what I did was, I don't know if you see this blue tab, it's a little tab you have to press and then pull. You press this tab and then pull the line back. Alright, so we're just gonna push this line over here to the side, and this clamp here is not really tight. You can just push it with your fingers, and as you can see, a little bit of fuel came out of that line, which is normal. So now I'm going to disconnect this other line. Alright, so I got these two lines disconnected. So now we're gonna remove these Phillips screws that hold the fuel pump cover in place. And it's recommended to drop the fuel tank and clean it when you replace the fuel pump. So it's something we're gonna have to do once we get this vehicle moved. And we're gonna see how much dirt this fuel tank has in it. Alright, so now we're gonna remove this cover. Let's put the cover here on the side and we can just lift the fuel pump. And the whole unit is gonna come out. Let me see if I can do this one-handed while I'm holding the camera. If I can't, I'm gonna have to sit you guys over there so I can, or maybe I can. So right here, here she comes. So it basically sits this way, and the fuel level, this lever here, kind of points back towards the trunk. Alright, so here's the fuel pump unit. That's our whole fuel sending unit. I'm just gonna sit it over here and let's inspect the inside of the fuel tank. I don't know if you guys can see, I see a little bit of dirt there. It's a little dirty, so we're gonna clean the inside of the fuel tank and then we'll get a replacement part for this fuel sending unit. I'll get a new one, we're gonna replace it. I'll bring you guys back up. I'm sure once we replace this, our vehicle is gonna run, and then we'll wrap up this video. So I'll bring you guys back up once the new part comes in. Alright, so we're back here about a week and a half later. We got the fuel pump now. I had to order it from the dealer. It took a couple of days. Now here we are. So here is the fuel pump box. I hope you guys can see the part number right there. So that's the part number from Hyundai. I had to get this fuel pump from the dealer themselves because nobody had this fuel pump around here. I called all the parts stores, nobody had it in stock and nobody could even get it, which was really weird. So I mean, a Genesis is just a fancy Hyundai, but I thought all these guys were gonna have it, but nobody had it, so I had to go to the dealer. I mean, you gotta love dealer parts. I mean, it's the OE, okay? So we're gonna install this, and then this vehicle should start. But before we install this new fuel pump, actually, let me get it out of the box first. Ooh, check that out. So here it is, nice. So here is the new fuel pump assembly, okay? It's the whole unit with the fuel level sensor and everything. I was told by the dealer that it's got 2 fuel level sensors. There's another one on the passenger side. I guess it's a tiny pump and a fuel level sensor that sends the fuel from that side of the tank to the other side. But this is what was defective. This is what we needed. Remember before we called the pump, we checked powers and grounds at the sensor electrical connector, and we determined that the pump was getting power and ground, but it wasn't sending any fuel to the engine. So one test I want to do before we install this new pump, the test I want to do is the current test. I'm gonna reconnect the old fuel pump right here. So we're gonna reconnect this old fuel sending unit, and then we're gonna clamp our amp clamp around the pump ground wire so we can see how much current this pump is drawing. And then once we connect this one, I'm sure once we connect this, the vehicle will start. And we're also gonna take a current measurement of this pump to see how much current this pump is gonna draw. So I'm gonna connect this one, and we'll put an amp clamp around it to see how much current this defective pump is drawing. I got my lab scope connected and ready to go. I have my amp clamp clamped around the fuel pump ground wire. I know it's getting dark and I'm working outside, so I didn't want to push the vehicle inside the shop. So let's do this really quickly before it gets too dark. So I will crank the engine, and then we'll see how much current this pump is going to draw. So as you can see, that line is not moving. So and again, this test is basically not necessary. We already checked powers and grounds here at the pump connector. We determined that there was power and ground at the pump connector, but the vehicle wasn't running, okay? So bad fuel pump. As the line here stays still, the line is not moving, it means we might have an open pump. So in here, the windings of the pump might be open, so there's no current flow. This step is really not necessary. I'm just trying to check, but you don't have to do this. Once you have power and ground at the pump should run. If it doesn't run, it's a bad pump, you can call it. So now let's install the new pump and connect it back up so we can start the vehicle, and then we'll do the current measurement afterwards. So I'm about to install the new fuel pump, and there's one thing I want to mention before I put this pump in. While you replace your pump, you have to make sure that you clean the bottom of your fuel tank. This fuel tank was a little bit dirty, so I got rid of all the debris, all the contaminants that were on the bottom of the fuel tank. If you don't clean your fuel tank, eventually all that dirt is gonna work its way inside the fuel pump, and then it's gonna shorten the life of your fuel pump. So make sure you clean your tank when you replace this fuel pump. So now we're gonna install our pump. I'm trying to do this one-handed. So here is the pump. So now we're gonna install the ring that holds the pump in place, and then we're gonna install the bolts that hold the pump. So I tightened all the bolts that hold the fuel pump secure. So now I'm gonna connect the feed line. So the feed line is connected. So now we're gonna connect the other line. Alright, so I connected the other line. So now I'm gonna connect the electrical connector for the fuel pump. Alright, so the electrical connector for the fuel pump has been connected. So now I'm gonna take you to the engine compartment. I still have my water bottle in the engine compartment, and the fuel supply line is still disconnected. So once I crank it, we should see fuel come out of that line. So let's go under the hood now. Alright, so we are here under the hood, and I still have my water bottle there, and that line is the fuel supply line that supplies fuel to the engine. So as you can see, it's empty. I'm gonna go inside the car and crank it. So after I crank it, this water bottle should be filled with gas if our fuel pump is now working. So let's go inside the car and crank it. Alright, so I'll have you watch that water bottle while I crank the engine. Don't know if you saw that, but now there's gas inside the water bottle. Do you see this? Alright, so right here, as you can see, now we have fuel coming out of this supply line. Before, we didn't have any fuel come out of it. So now I'm gonna get this out of here. So that's good. I'm gonna reconnect this line so that we can start the engine. So I'm gonna tighten these two nuts and then we'll start the engine. I'm sorry that I'm having to do this in the dark, but I really want to move this car. And I've had a long day. I had so many vehicles to work on. So this was like the last one, and I had to finish this today. So I will tighten these nuts and then we will get this engine started. Alright guys, so I did tighten all the nuts that hold the fuel supply line in place. So now let's start it. Right there. It started, baby. So as you can see, the Hyundai just started. So I'm gonna turn it off. Let's start it one more time. So right there, the vehicle just started. Okay? So what do you guys think? Did we make the right call? Oh yes, of course we did. We made the right call. I'm not gonna worry about these lights right now, this ESC light and the tire pressure monitor light. I will let the customer know, or I can connect the scan tool to see why these lights came on. Actually, before I wrap up this video, I'm gonna clamp my amp clamp around the ground wire of the fuel pump so we can see how much current this new pump is drawing. Remember before, the other one didn't draw anything. Let's just do a current test on this new one, and then we will wrap up this video. So right there guys, what do you guys see? This is our fuel pump running. Okay, so good working fuel pump, and it's drawing around 7 amps. So I'm looking at this number. So the max amperage is drawing is, let me refresh this. Yeah, so the max amperage is 9 amps. I'm looking at the number down here. The max amperage is drawing is about 9 amps, and then the average is around 7.8. Okay, so right there, and we can pause this and look at pump RPM and all that stuff, but we don't need it. What we need is the engine running, and the vehicle is running now. Okay, so I think we can wrap up this video. Alright, so right there, I'm gonna leave it right here. I'm not gonna turn it off because it's gonna be dark here, you won't see anything. So I'm just gonna wrap up this video while the engine is running. So right there, we made the right call, defective fuel pump. Okay, so before you call a pump, pretty much before you call any motor, any electric motor, any module, anything, check your power, check your ground. If you have a crank no start condition, check your spark. check your fuel pressure. You need spark, fuel, and compression for the engine to run. Based on how well this engine sounded, I knew we didn't have a compression issue, so I kind of went past that. And also based on the symptom and what the customer told me, the customer said it was driving, all of a sudden it quit. So I don't think we had a spark issue. That's why I went to checking fuel pressure first. And once we checked fuel pressure, we saw we couldn't have any fuel going to the engine. Okay, and then we checked power and ground at the pump. If you have power and ground at the pump, your pump should run. If it doesn't run, it means it's defective. I will leave it right here. I hope you like this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why. If this is your first time here, subscribe to my YouTube channel, K Diagnostics. While you are down there, ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.